All right, well, I've never used one of these before. Always a first. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on how this talk came to be. About 15 years ago, some life events caused me to become very curious about the trickster archetype and to do a lot of research and ruminating and having discussions with friends. And synchronistically, books came my way on the topic, and one of the results of that whole period was this talk, which I'm going to share with you this morning. And it's called The Trickster Archetype. And some of you have heard me talk before, and you know that I like to dig into the definitions and etymology of words. So I'll start there. So we'll start with archetype. I'm sure you know, but there are several dominant archetypes we see in art, mythology, psychology, and religion, like the hero, the wise man, the mother, the devil, the child, the teacher, and of course the trickster. Webster's New World Dictionary lists two definitions for archetype. The first being the original pattern or model from which other things of the same kind are made, prototype. The second being, in Jungian psychology, any of several innate ideas or patterns in the psyche expressed in dreams, art, etc., as certain basic symbols or images. Oftentimes I think of a tarot deck. So the formalization of this concept goes back as far as Plato. Of course, the existence of this thing goes back, since time immemorial, but the formalization of it into kind of a, theory, Plato. And the etymology of the word, it derives in part from the Greek root arch, which conjures up that potent image of a bridge connecting two things together, often two dissimilar things. And that bridge is the indirect forms, such as images or sounds even, which help us to understand or explain things that can't be intellectually comprehended or rationally described. And again, as that relates to the second definition, that bridge is joining the unconscious things that we experience with our conscious world. So archetypes illuminate our inner world and mystery as well, without diminishing that awe that we experience. And I feel that they, under the light of these symbols, we're enriched and informed. So Jung's own description of archetype is, or the trickster archetype, just archetype, is, this is a quote. The language is a little bit dense, so I'll probably repeat the first sentence. Innate, universal psychic dispositions that form the substrate from which the basic symbols or representations of unconscious experience emerge. So just one more time. Innate, universal dispositions that form the substrate from which basic symbols or representations of the unconscious experience emerge. The archetype is the tendency to form representations of a motif, representations that can vary a great deal in detail, but still keep their same basic pattern. So back to that tarot deck, think of all the different tarot decks you've seen. It's still, it's a fool, it's still the hanged man, it's still whatever it is, but someone's interpretation of it is different from person to person. And he says, this is important, it is indeed an instinctive trend. So we might say that they provide a way for us to translate into the visible or sensed reality our inner world, a world that we all share. And this sharing of an inner world is important here because Jung felt that archetypes were evidence of communion with some divine or world mind. Love that. Communion with some divine or world mind. So a lot of us, when we think of trickster, what is the first thing that pops into our head, right? Coyote, right? Yeah. And of course, if you live in the Great Plains of this country, you will be very familiar with this trickster figure because the Native American people in that area had a strong trickster figure named Coyote in their stories and mythology, who was also referred to as the Old Man. And besides being involved in stories of outlandish antics, he was also included in some of the creation stories, like the creating of humans from clay. And of course, if you grew up like I did with Saturday morning cartoons, you were introduced to Wile E. Coyote, Right? The prankster who was always trying to outwit his opponent, but usually ended up the butt of his own tricks. Well, it turns out that we find trickster figure in many different cultures and religions around the world. And usually it's in the form of a god slash spirit or an anthropomorphic kind of animal. And usually he, rarely female, but able to shift genders, plays tricks, disobeys the rules and normal conventional behavior. Sometimes this is done in a playful and mischievous way, and other times in a kind of outrageous or malicious manner. In either case, the trickster's tricks are unintentional and often have a positive outcome, like your experience. So contradiction is present in both the cunning and foolish behavior exhibited oftentimes simultaneously. And in some Lakota tribes, they had the tradition of the heyoka, or the contrary. And that was where a person's role in the community was to do things like backwards and inside out and upside down and opposite. And this role was supposed to raise consciousness of otherness and help us to not take ourselves too seriously and not get stuck in ruts of behavior and ways of thinking, and to also not become self-righteous. And I really believe that, well, while there are many things at the core of this concept, but this is one of them, how trickster shows up for us in our spiritual journey. So it turns out also that many Native American and indigenous people believe that clowns and tricksters are essential to any contact with the sacred. Right? Humor, in addition to being good medicine, is important because it opens us up and allows us to take it in, right? And be freed of our rigid preconceptions. So we learn that this sacred experience can also come from upset, reversal, surprise. And sometimes that's hard, at first to realize, because you're like, oh my God, why me? Why me? So I just want to read to you an excerpt from this wonderful book. As I mentioned, books came to me synchronistically. This was one of them, The Power of Myth, which is a great book. I see a lot of people's heads shaking. Joseph Campbell and Bill Moyers have these great discussions. And I just stopped, I was on my way back home from the Midwest, and I stopped some little town in maybe South Dakota, and it was a little used bookstore. I walked in. This is prominently displayed for $5. I said, I'll take it. But anyway, so we're going to pop in here into their conversation. Moyer says, I feel stronger in my own faith, knowing that others experience the same yearnings, and we're seeking for similar images to try to express an experience beyond the costume of ordinary human language. And Campbell says, this is why clowns and clown religions are helpful. Germanic and Celtic myths are full of clown figures, really grotesque deities sometimes. This makes the point, I am not the ultimate image. I am transparent to something. Look through me, through my funny form. And then Moyer says, there's a wonderful story in some African tradition of a god who's walking down the road wearing a hat that's colored red on one side and blue on the other. And when the farmers in the field look up and see the god, and they say, when they go to the town, at night to have drinks and eat and talk, they say, did you see that guy with the blue hat? And the other ones are like, no, I had a yellow hat on, or I had a red hat on, And they're like, get into a big fight. And Campbell says, yes, that's the Nigerian trickster god, Edshu. He makes it even worse by first walking in one direction, then turning around and walking in the other and changing the hat. So it's still the same. And then when they get into a bigger fight and they're brought before the king for judgment, the trickster god shows up and he said, it's my fault. I did it. And I meant to do it. Spreading strife was my greatest joy. Oh my goodness. Moyer says, there's a truth to that. And Campbell says, there sure is. And there's two ways of pronouncing this name of this famous philosopher. In English, I believe we say Heraclitus, and I think in British English it's Heraclitus. But at any rate, that guy said strife is the creator of all great things. God, really? Does it have to be? Sometimes, right? And he says, so something like that may be implicit in the symbolic trickster idea. He says, in our tradition, the serpent in the garden did the job. Just when everything was fixed and fine, they threw an apple into the picture. So, and he says, no matter what the system of thought you have or anybody has, it can't possibly include the boundlessness of life. Just when you think everything is fine and the way it should be and the way it's always going to be, trickster shows up, it all blows, and you get change and you get becoming again. And you know, I love it. It's true. Sometimes it's hard to swallow, but yeah. Have you ever heard of the town Greensburg, Kansas? Yeah, okay. So maybe you know that's a town right in the middle of Kansas, Tornado Alley. It got leveled back in, I think, 2007, wasn't it? Right around then. Leveled, you know, it was terrible. It was devastating and tragic. People lost their homes, people lost lives. But as we do after a tragedy, we kind of crawl out from under our rocks and we look around and go, what are we going to do? And they said, well, you know, we're going to use this as an opportunity to rebuild and rebuild better. So we're going to use environmentally sustainable sourced building materials. We're going to make everything be really well insulated. We're going to use everything, have the energy be from alternative sources, sun and wind. And so they have this totally green town now. How amazing that they took that as that opportunity. And so in commemoration of this hard thing that happened to them, that they then turned into something forward, but positive moving forward, they have several sculptures of tornadoes prominently displayed around the town. So, you know, we see that if we can begin to explore and embrace this trickster archetype, we become open to life's multiplicity and paradox. You know, things are not black and white, they're not right and wrong, they're more multidimensional, many-faceted, and richly complex. And along those lines, I'll read another excerpt to you from this great book by Thomas More, Soulmates. And this is towards the end of the book. You probably have both of these books in your library. Pathos is one of those great words like logos, eros, dharma, Tao, that cannot be defined, that cannot be defined, and pointing like them towards mysteries of infinite range and profundity. The ancient Greeks used the word pathos to denote emotion, felt experience, simply being affected, and even the impact of the divine upon human life. We find pathos in art, especially in music, as in Beethoven's soul-stirring sonata, the Pathétique, and Tchaikovsky's symphony by the same name. It's a good idea to have these uses in mind when we consider a more recent, less aesthetic use of the word in medicine and psychology, which is pathology. Dictionaries, he's like me, likes to go to the definitions and etymology. Dictionaries define pathos as suffering, but that definition is both limited and misleading. When we feel the impact of life, as when someone close to us dies, or a powerful love strikes unexpectedly, or when a significant change in our lives occur, we may call the impact of that experience suffering, because it jolts us, it disorients us, it causes the pain of not knowing what the future will bring. But from a less subjective point of view, pathos is the visitation of something fateful, or preternatural, angelic. It is both less personal and more constructive than the word suffering suggests. And if we were to take into account the ancient religious use of the word, we would have to describe a psychological pathologist as one who's concerned with the disturbances of the soul owing to divine intrusion. Or philosophical trauma, right? That point in which we have to go, I really need to start thinking and believing a little bit differently. In examining the pathologies that frequently accompany love, we might think of them as tremors associated with profound shifts of fate and reorderings of life and personality. Of course, this is disturbing and it's disruptive and it's painful, but as we have seen, they can also be viewed as opportunities for significant movements of the soul. Yeah, I mean, he's a wonderful writer and it's just profound stuff. So check this book out. So kind of on another note, when we think of comedians, we could maybe think of them as our modern day tricksters, right? They make us laugh, again, that good medicine. And they often induce laughter by saying things no one else will say, but maybe are thinking. And also things, you're not supposed to say or even think. Taboo topics like sex and class, race, stereotypes. They express unpolitically correct sentiments and act like a societal escape valve. It's needed, right? So sometimes trickster shows up as a culture hero. Well, this is a little different. Like Prometheus or Raven, our Northwest native trickster figure. And again, Coyote, stealing fire from the gods to benefit humans. And sometimes they figure prominently in the creation myths, or even are the creator. God is trickster, which Jung discusses in his essay, Answer to Job, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. Sometimes they're the messenger or the transformer, and as they go about their work, they can not only shift genders, but they can shift their shape, which is why they're often referred to as shapeshifters. Some trickster figures we may not be as familiar with are Legba, Loki, Anansi, Bachunkaga. Loki, you might know, I think there's like a big major motion picture out now called Loki, right? But I think that's probably a Hollywood version. But the sort of medieval Loki Norse character is a medieval fool, shapeshifter. And he's more malicious than most. He's mean and he's insulting and he induces quarreling. He's said to mix mead with malice. He confounds, he confuses, he's ambivalent, and ultimately is a profound catalyst. The Yoruban version, Echu, which they mentioned here in the Power of Myth, he can, in addition to being a god that walks down a road with a red and a blue hat, he can show up as a monkey figure. And in one of the stories, he outwits the lion, and the lion being an authority figure, by speaking figuratively in code or symbol. And the lion doesn't understand that, he just understands literally. So while Echu is using the same language, but on a different level, the lion misses the clues and signs and falls prey to Echu's ruses. Now, Wachumkaga is a Winnebago prominent Winnebago character in the form of a rabbit or a hare. Going back to the cartoon characters, I can't help but think of another trickster, Bugs Bunny, right? And he definitely challenged the authority figure that Elmer Fudd tried to represent. So Wachumkaga also is related to the African-American trickster figure Brer Rabbit, who uses clever language, in rebellion, and tries to deconstruct an oppressive society. So the idea that cleverly manipulated language can kind of subvert, or can actually subvert a restrictive hierarchy. And it just makes me think that this whole 60s movement was sort of a generational trickster motif. Now, the Akan people of West Africa, they have a spider trickster figure named Anansi. And sometimes that is shortened to Nancy or anglicized in African-American stories or dialect to Aunt Nancy. Similar to Coyote and Raven, he's both a culture hero and a mischief maker. His central narrative is that he tried to get God to give him the stories so he could share the wisdom contained within them with the people. And God said, okay, I'll give you the stories, but first you have to collect a whole variety of different creatures. And we do see that again in mythology, right? These various tasks that need to be completed before something can happen, kind of an initiation of sorts. So anyway, Anansi goes out there and he manages to capture all these creatures. They are, by the way, a python, a leopard, and a swarm of hornets. So using various ruses, he manages to capture them all. And one of them is he tells the anaconda, the python, that I want to see, let's see if you're the biggest python around. So the snake stretches out on the branch and he uses the measuring string to measure him and then ties him up instead. And for the leopard, he says, I'll help you out of a pit that he had fallen into. The leopard, of course, Anansi dug the pit. And I'll use my webs. But the webs quickly ensnared rather than freed. Finally, he faked a rainstorm and offered the now nestless hornets refuge in his calabash. But that quickly became a cage as he stoppered it up. So he's done everything. God's like, all right, I'll give you the stories. And, but then he says, I'm not going to share them with the people. I'm going to keep them safe. I'll just hoard them, keep them safekeeping. So he climbs up a tree, and it's kind of awkward going because he's got this big calabash, it's like a big kind of gourd-like thing. And of course, it falls and breaks. And then this huge storm comes at the same time and washes the spilled stories into a fast-moving creek and all the way out to the ocean. So there he was trying to hoard the stories, and they ended up getting dispersed even way more widely than he had originally planned. This is classic. Interestingly, studies by scholars have indicated that when the trickster figure are female, which, as we mentioned earlier, is not that common, and or imagined through women, there's less buffoonery and more sophisticated humor. With female tricksters, there's more concern for social transformation and for environmental awareness, yet subversion is still at the core. Another great book that came to me on this during this period while I was on this quest is Paul Radden's The Winnebago Trickster, and it's also called The Winnebago Trickster Cycle. And as the title suggests, as the story comes around and around again, it evolves, it grows, it changes. Hare, or Wakchung starts out as beyond the pale in his behavior, breaking every taboo, totally lacking any kind of self-preservation mechanisms. But he somehow manages to emerge relatively unscathed in the end. But throughout the story, he slowly grows up. And included at the end of the book is a pithy essay by Jung called The Psychology of the Trickster. And I'll just discuss and quote some of that here. So Jung associated the trickster with the shadow aspect. And that's one of the main archetypes in his theories of the human psychological framework. And he called it a collective shadow figure. And of course, the shadow is a part of ourselves we don't like to, admit to because we're not that proud of those aspects. But his belief was that we really need to confront these aspects so they don't get the better of us, bring them out into the light. So they don't get the better of us, remaining in our unconscious, creating behavior we're unaware of, and then don't take responsibility for, and then project onto others. So by bringing these aspects to the light, we can keep them in check and are less likely to be bitten in the proverbial butt by them. So Jung also saw trickster as a savior figure, the wounded wounder as healer. I like that, the wounded wounder as healer. He says he's a forerunner of the savior, and he's all at once, he's God, man, and animal. He's subhuman and he's superhuman, bestial and divine, whose chief and most alarming characteristic is his unconsciousness. That's Jung saying that. And the quote may be better understood by reading Jung's essay, if you ever get a chance to, called Answer to Job, where he discusses the Old Testament story in which God is portrayed as unpredictable and contrary, alternately benevolent and kind, and then disproportionately wrathful and jealous. Jung also sees trickster as a primitive memory of ourselves as less evolved humans, a story of transformation from unconscious to more conscious, subhuman to human. And he attributes this success to the considerable eagerness to learn exhibited by the figures in the story. And I'm just going to say here, I could have said it anywhere in the talk, and both of you, I think, touched on this, that, we're all in this room because we share, a kind of path. And I would say it's probably true that we're all here. We are concerned with self-realization and spiritual evolution and transformation. And this potent image of trickster really plays an important role in this ongoing process. So with the shadow, back to the shadow, again, instead of repressing this sort of memory of our less evolved selves, repression is often the best way to give life to something, right, and turn it into something worse than it is. We bring that out and we subject it. He says we keep the shadow figure conscious and subject it to criticism, and we become more fully integrated that way. So he also talks about how in psychoanalysis, when an individual works with their shadow aspect, a metaphorical disaster ensues, and thus the longing for a savior, which we find in ourselves. So that's my humorous, if you were a natural disaster, what would you be? That's where that comes from. And he says, the recognition and unavoidable integration of the shadow creates such a harrowing situation that nobody but a savior can undo the tangled web of fate. And for an individual, he suggests that this is answered by exploring the anima, or the feminine aspect, similar to the great mother, the wise woman. And anima is connected to interrelatedness. And when it boils right down to, I mean, that's what we're talking about, right? We're all connected. It's all one. We're all one. And for the collective, it's hopefully answered by ending the tendency to project our shadow onto other cultures and countries, which so often erupts in war. And an end to this unconscious behavior would include not only tolerance, but celebration of differences, taking responsibility for our own mistakes and misdoings, and having compassion for our own foibles and faults, as well as, and especially, as for those of others. And in the process, allowing for the emergence of right action without that self-righteousness. So I hope that you have found this trickster energy to be illuminating today. And I'm just going to wrap up with another thing that was a result of this period of time, which is my song called Trickster, appropriately titled.
Trickster never cuts me off. Leave your microphone on. They can't hear you over.
Okay, I hope it will work. I feel a little bit awkward with it on, but see what we can do. Oh, okay. This mic isn't working, huh? Okay, got it. Oh, we probably should have just mic'd the amp. Oh, well. Do a little do-si-do here. Whoops. All right, Trickster. So, Trickster is very active at the moment. Goodness. Let's see if we're in tune. Not bad. All right. Trickster, trickster on the run, dream of lightning and then come undone. What a heavy load to bear when you don't even know you're there. Trickster, 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 Mercury, Hermes, Loki. Or sometimes you play the fool, other times you break all the rules. Leave it up to us to decide which line we won't cross. Trickster, 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 Mercury, Hermes, Loki. Aoka, contrary, raven, crow, and coyote, monkey, monkey, tango on the sea. Oh, so wild and untamed, in your light we do not have a name. In your shadow we let go of shame and stand out in the pouring rain. Trickster, 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 Mercury, Hermes, Loki. Aoka, contrary, raven, crow, and coyote, monkey, monkey, tango on the sea.
Trickster, trickster on the run. Dream of lightning and they come undone. What a heavy load to bear when you don't even know you're there.
Thank you.
Thank you.